You are watching the multi-awarded Radio Bandido TV on channel 224 Sky Cable and TV Plus boxes. Simulcast on DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Informing, advising, and entertaining the Filipinos and OFWs around the world. Streaming live on www.facebook.com/DZRJ 8:10 a.m. or on YouTube, channel DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Radio Bandido.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello and welcome to the World News Jam on DZRJ and Radio Bandito. My name is Eric Lecain. We are here discussing the top news stories from around the world, bringing them here to you, the Filipino, in case you missed anything this week. I hope everyone had a wonderful week. I got to be part of the Manila's Best Dressed event there in the Manila Hotel. Met so many wonderful Filipinos. It's great to be out at something so nice in this world, because the news this week has not been so kind to many places in the world. Thailand and Myanmar had a shaky week as they got hit with an absolutely horrible earthquake. Also, we'll look at whether it's safe as a foreigner to go to school in the U.S. Seems now you need to be very careful what you say there. Later, I'll explain the signal gate and how maybe the people in the Trump administration should be more careful of who they invite to their chat groups. Also, a look into the shrinking of the Ukraine, and a look at sports and a young Filipino tennis player that is making the tennis world do a double take. All right, let's get to it here on the World News Jam. We learned something this week. We learned what happens to a rooftop pool when you have a 7.7 magnitude earthquake that hits. Well, the water doesn't stay in the pool. This past Friday, Thailand had one of its worst earthquakes in history. There are shocking videos of water flying off the roof of buildings as the powerful earthquake intensified. It looked almost like waterfalls coming off the side of buildings. And also a very scary video of people in the rooftop pool right when the earthquake hit. But the worst were the buildings that were nearly finished, but not completely finished. There's a video of one of those buildings just completely collapsing like a bomb just hit it. Just completely dropping to the ground in like 2 seconds. Now, the stories come out of Thailand are of people running and screaming for their lives, desperately trying to get out of the buildings. Currently, it looks like 11 people have been killed in Thailand, with hundreds injured, and many still missing. There are buildings that collapsed on top of many people, and they are still looking for all those that are unaccounted for. One building, it's in a heap of rubble about 20 meters high, which they know many were trapped inside, but there's just no way to get to them. But honestly, Thailand is not where the earthquake even came from. In fact, the epicenter of the earthquake is hundreds of miles away in Myanmar. In the town of Mandalay, about 10 meters below the surface, the earthquake was so powerful that it caused extensive damage in Bangkok, Thailand. It even caused damage in China and India and Cambodia. But the issue is, if it caused so much damage hundreds and hundreds of miles away, what was the damage like in Myanmar? One of the poorest countries in Asia, where infrastructure is not that good to begin with. And, well, they're in the middle of a civil war. It was what you might think, or even worse. As of now, the death toll stands at 1,700 maybe, with thousands more injured. But, you know, that number is going to change dramatically. Many buildings completely collapsed with people in them. But then there came the race to try and get the people out while they're still alive. But The damage is so extensive there, it's just not enough heavy equipment to dig through all the debris. And also, Myanmar is run by the military regime, which does not, in general, allow many foreigners to enter the city. So the news there is just spotty at best. But videos have been emerging every day. You can see buildings just disappearing in a huge plume of dust. There's a video of a woman and her baby trapped underneath the rubble as emergency crews try to free their legs. The problem with trying to get people out like this is that the entire building could come down on their heads of the crews at any time while they're trying to free the people that are trapped. Obviously, thousands are injured, which has overwhelmed the hospitals, which are not equipped to handle such an emergency. In videos, you can see people being treated in the parking lot of the hospital because they fear that the hospital might collapse. Many people can't even reach the hospital because they've been completely cut off from the main cities. Many of the roads are completely impassable, even by motorcycle. And bridges over bodies of waters completely collapsed. But the hardest videos to watch are those beautiful religious historical buildings there in Myanmar, just toppling over, the cultural jewels of Burma that have stood for hundreds of years, just falling over in seconds. Of course, power, the internet is down. Most of the country, it's making it hard to know how bad things really are. The junta, there's the people that ruled Myanmar, they did something they almost never do. They're asking for help from the international community. Of course, right now, there is still fighting going on in Myanmar between the rebels and the outlying regions and the junta, which is making things even more complicated. One man said you could walk through his village and hear people screaming for help, trapped in old buildings that have just fallen down on top of them. But the problem, there's no one coming to rescue them. Most towns don't even have an emergency response team anywhere near them, which means they will have to wait until maybe the next day or hope maybe their neighbors will dig them out. There's a video from one village with many dead people wrapped in sheesh just laid out on the sidewalk. Just too many to count. That's why the official number of the dead, we already know it eventually it's going to be very, very wrong. This issue with Myanmar is that it sits between these two tectonic plates, the India and the Eurasian plates. The boundary between the two plates is called the Sangong Fault. Experts describe it as a long, straight line running approximately 1,200 kilometers from north to south through some of the cities such as Mandalay and Yangon, placing the whole area at high risk to earthquakes. According to a scientist, this week, the Myanmar earthquake was caused by the rubbing together of these two plates, something called strike-slip faulting. This movement can cause an energy buildup. Then there is a release of that energy. It in turn causes the shaking of the planet's surface. Then after the shaking has occurred, there are changes that will happen because of the original movement. These movements are what are called aftershocks. Myanmar has already had an aftershock of 6.3 magnitude, which is very dangerous because the initial shock of 7.7 has already weakened many buildings and structures. Myanmar has recently gone through a lot of new construction, especially in the bigger cities like Mandalay. But many of these new high-rise buildings were built very quick and with very little or to no regulations or building codes. This has made things even more problematic because many buildings may have not collapsed but could collapse at any moment. In other words, maybe buildings are at the point that they cannot be repaired at all. So if they don't just fall on their own, they must be demolished. It's believed that near 800,000 people were directly affected by the quake, by their buildings falling or becoming unsafe. This is going to be an issue coming in the next few weeks as to what are these people across the whole region, what are they going to do? They're going to want to go back to their homes that are currently not safe. Is the government going to assist them there? That's hard to know. This is a setup for more injuries and even more deaths. What I find so interesting, though, is that with all our technology, we still can't predict when an earthquake like this is going to happen. And there's something else. How could an earthquake in Myanmar do so much damage in Thailand? The answer seems to be something called seismic waves. The earthquake in Myanmar, they say some hit 8.2 on the Richter scale. And that earthquake caused tremors that sent vibrations across the tectonic plates. The buildings in Thailand resonate with the low frequencies of the vibrating waves. This is one of the main reasons why they could not predict this earthquake better. The earthquake was hundreds of miles away, but it was the vibrations traveling underground that made the earth shake. All they can do now is predict the aftershocks, which are mostly of less magnitude, but can even cause the same or more devastation. For now, the issue is digging through all the rubble as fast as possible to find any survivors and hope that an aftershock doesn't happen while the rescue people are under the buildings. In any case, we have to feel for the people of Bangkok, but moreover, for the people of Myanmar. They have been going through a civil war, and international sanctions, and now a major earthquake. I know that the death toll is going to rise, but let's just hope it doesn't rise too much. With all the problems going on in Myanmar, the last thing it needs is something like this to happen. Let's hope the earth will have some mercy in the coming week. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. So let's say your dream has always been to study in the U.S. Why not? Some of the best schools in the world are there. Medical, engineering, science, music. You can take all the exams, do all your applications, get a scholarship. But most importantly, you need that F1 visa. The visa that lets you into the U.S. so you can study. But now you're there at school. You're doing very well. Well, I don't know, maybe you're a Fulbright scholar at a top university. And you're in the USA, a place with free speech, freedom of religion, free to express yourself however you like, without fear. Okay, it used to be that place. Just ask a Turkish doctoral student at Tufts University, who was indeed a Fulbright scholar. Seems a year ago, she wrote an op-ed with 3 other people in a school newspaper, which pointed out the genocide happening in Gaza. Something that has been well documented, even in the UN. So, because of that op-ed piece, last week, just a few steps from her school, 6 people wearing dark clothes and masks surrounded her. They put her in handcuffs, pushed her into a black, unmarked vehicle, and sped away. People that witnessed the incident said it looked very much like a kidnapping. Turns out the people wearing the black clothes were from ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They were waiting for the 30-year-old Turkish woman and arrested her for what? She was in the country legally. She had no criminal record, nor had she ever committed a crime. Seems as if she just had an opinion different than that of the Trump administration. So it turns out in the U.S., according to the Trump and his Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, if you're a foreign student and speak out in support of the Palestinians in Gaza, well, that is grounds to be arrested and removed from the country. Remember last week we discussed that student from Columbia University? He was not only a student, he was a permanent resident of the U.S. and married to a U.S. citizen, about to have a baby. They grabbed him in a similar way, accused him of supporting Hamas, which is something he still denies. Now, this woman was at Tufts University, which is just outside of Boston, where she lived while she was studying. But she's been taken to a detention center in Louisiana, thousands of miles away. This came after a U.S. district judge said that she was not to be removed from the state of Massachusetts. But then no one was able to locate her or speak to her. This is after she was picked up. No one even knew where she was. Then finally, a U.S. senator that she told them that she had indeed been moved to a detention center in Louisiana, thousands of miles away. Right now, the student's lawyer is suing to have access to her client. This has started protests coming in at the school demanding her immediate release. The president of Tufts said that they had no notice of the impending arrest, and that in a statement, he said, "It's distressing to some members of our community, particularly the members of our international community." This all leads to other stories going on around the U.S. A South Korean student at Columbia University, who is a legal permanent U.S. resident, was about to be arrested before a judge blocked ICE from taking him. A Lebanese doctor, an assistant professor at Brown University, was denied entry at an airport and deported back to Lebanon. The reason, they said, that on her phone was a picture that they say showed her sympathetic to 𝗪Ç𝗿𝗋, which of course she denies. The Trump administration has also targeted students at Cornell University, Georgetown, many other top schools in the U.S. So the student at Tufts that was put in a detention center now has a court order that she is not to be removed from the U.S. It says that in that order for the Trump administration to deport her, they must first have a reason, because they have offered no evidence that she has done anything illegal. There's no evidence that she has anything against the U.S., and that she must be allowed to speak to her lawyer. The odd thing is, in this case, is that the student supposedly was not much of an activist to begin with, and that she did not lead or orchestrate any protests. In fact, she volunteered to help refugee children. The director of the ACLU that looks into human rights violations said grabbing someone off the street, stripping them of their student visa, and detaining them solely based on a political viewpoint is an affront to all of our constitutional rights. You know, the ironic thing in these somewhat crazy jumps to deport students is that the Trump administration is saying that it's doing this because of the anti-Semitism that it's bringing to college campuses from foreign students. However, many of the protests on the campuses are coming from the Jewish activists and groups, the same people that Trump said he is protecting. Now, there's a very large portion of the U.S. population that is not supporting Israel in the war in Gaza. A lot of that has to do with the killing of the women and children in Gaza. In fact, the UN has issued a warrant against the President Netanyahu of Israel for crimes against humanity. But even so, Trump is still targeting any foreigner or foreign student with a visa that speaks out in any way against Israel. And it doesn't matter whether you're a U.S. resident or not. Trump said to all the resident aliens who joined the pro-jihadist protests, "We put you on notice. Come 2025, we will find you. We will deport you. I will also quickly cancel the student visas of all Hamas sympathizers on college campuses, which will have been infested with radicalism like never before." Also in the Trump executive order, he not only goes after students, but also is saying that he will defund any university that supports these students. So if I understand this correctly, if you support the Palestinians, in which 50,000 have been killed, mostly women and children, you will be arrested and removed from the U.S. Now, this seems strange, doesn't it? I mean, it's the U.S. we're talking about. Aren't there laws that protect students and universities from persecution based on political viewpoints? I mean, that's a big deal in the U.S. In reality, there are laws to protect the rights of people from anything, any sort of thing like this. But I think because of that, these policies from the Trump administration have really caught people off guard. I mean, in my lifetime, I have not seen people picked up off the street and taken to another state, defying court orders. I mean, that really seems like something you only see in places like Russia or Iran, like a secret police that looks for people speaking out against the government, getting your names put on a list. Supposedly, there are warnings being issued from schools in the U.S. telling foreign students not to leave the country for spring break, that they couldn't be sure that they would be allowed to get back into the country. I mean, the one girl from Lebanon had a picture on her phone. Even the European government is warning citizens about travel to the U.S. It's almost as if the world turned upside down in the past few months. I mean, students being snatched off the street in the U.S. by mask-wearing secret police. It's like a TV show. Just so unrealistic. And this is the World News Jam on DZRJ and Radio Bandito TV. I'm Eric Lecain. Well, there are a few stories this week that involve the Defense Secretary of the U.S., Pete Hegseth. Now, Pete is the pick of Donald Trump to oversee the largest military budget in the world and make decisions over the single biggest nuclear arsenal on the planet and run the most powerful military on Earth. Now, there's been some criticism of Hegseth since coming into office, mostly about his previous job, which he was a Fox weekend TV host, that somehow that makes him not qualified to run such an agency, that he's had many problems with drinking and also had a sexual assault charge against him and paid the woman off not to press charges. Oh, and he was removed from chairing a veterans organization for a complete mismanagement of it. So basically, having no experience in managing an agency as large as the Pentagon or any experience that would qualify him for any kind of position such as that. That's just some of the subjects that came up at the Senate confirmation hearing. But this week, he is on a trip to Asia, and his first stop is the Philippines. His main purpose is to discuss the Chinese occupation of the West Philippine Sea. In a news conference, the first thing he did was blame all the problems in the Philippines on the Biden administration, saying that insignificant actions by them had emboldened aggressors like China over the years, and that the Trump administration was rebuilding the U.S. military. He said, "What we're dealing with right now is many years of deferred maintenance of weakness that we need to reestablish strength and deterrence in multiple places around the globe. Friends need to stand shoulder to shoulder to deter conflict, to ensure that there is free navigation, whether you call it the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea." He said he would commit more funding beyond the $500 million of the Biden administration to help modernize the Philippine military. He also talked about large military exercises involving thousands of U.S. and Philippine forces next month. He went on to say that the U.S. has real war plans and that the U.S. was ready to work with allied forces to create strategic dilemmas for the communist Chinese that will help them reconsider whether or not violence or action is something they want to undertake. But besides all these words from the secretary, there's also been concerns with Asian countries in regards to Trump's America First policies and whether the U.S. can truly commit to the region, and will it actually stand by its promises? In fact, China spoke out just before Hegseth's visit to say that the U.S. has an astonishing record of breaking its promises and abandoning its allies. Throughout its history, that nothing good could come of opening the door to a predator. Those who willingly serve as chess pieces will be deserted in the end. Basically, the Philippines is the chess pieces. So between the U.S., China, and the Philippines, each country now seems to have its choice of who it wants as its friends. But China, also knowing that the Philippines and the U.S. already do have a partnership, made a lightly veiled threat that any cooperation between the two countries must not harm the security interests of other countries, I'm assuming that means them, and must not undermine the peace and stability in the region. Of course, right now, the Trump administration is in the middle of a tariff war with China, in which the U.S. is hitting China with big tariffs, and of course, China is hitting right back. Like I said, that war is going on between the U.S. and China, and it will eventually spill into the Philippines, whether the Philippines likes it or not. But the biggest news surrounding 𝗡𝗲𝗄𝘃 this week is neither the tariffs wars or the issues in the Philippine Sea. It actually involves a chat group that centers around one of the single largest mishandlings of U.S. classified information by top-level cabinet appointees since I don't know when. This chat group was on an app called Signal. Now, Signal is much like WhatsApp or Viber. Those are the two that we use here in the Philippines. You can send encrypted messages to people that are your friends, and you can also make groups of friends that you can share messages to several people at once. Well, it seems a lot of people in the Trump administration use this app Signal and are sending messages and sharing data there, which seems a bit odd, right? I mean, you're probably asking, doesn't the U.S. government have its own application and procedures of sending classified data? The answer is yes, they do. Anyway, it was maybe, I think, March 11th, a man named Jeffrey Goldberg, who is a reporter with The Atlantic, a publication there in the U.S., he got a friend request from another guy named Michael Waltz, who is the Trump National Security Advisor. Now, at first, the reporter thought this must be someone either playing a joke on him or a scammer of some type, but he accepted the request anyway. Then, a few days later, he was invited to be in a group called the Houthi PC Small Group. Now, we talked about the bombing of the Houthi last week. They are the group that has been firing on ships in the Red Sea, and the U.S. military recently bombed them there in Yemen. Anyway, this chat group had all of the top people in the Trump administration, the vice president, the defense secretary, the head of the CIA, the head of the FBI, the secretary of state, the White House chief of staff. It was a who's who of the top officials in the Trump administration. Now, at one point in the chat, to Goldberg's surprise, 𝗡𝗲𝗄𝘃 started giving a play-by-play of the entire operation in Yemen. It also included military plans for strikes, weapons packages, targets, timings of the attack. I mean, stuff that is super secret. You have to understand, this was an attack on another country, and people were being targeted to be killed. And yet somehow, a reporter from The Atlantic was reading all this. But what's most interesting thing about this, in some of the conversation that was going on in the chat, we got to hear exactly how some of these people think. For instance, the vice president was asking how this bombing was going to benefit the U.S. How would it look to the public? How could they use this bombing to get focus away from the economy? Also, there was a message that he, the vice president, was tired of bailing out the Europeans, to which 𝗡𝗄𝗃, the Secretary of Defense, said he shared the loathing of the Europeans freeloading. His words were, "It's pathetic." He even also said, this is a good time as any to bomb Yemen, and that maybe we're the only ones that are going to do it anyway. Then there was this conversation with the White House Chief of Staff about how they need to get paid for helping out Europe with this. In other words, the U.S. will bomb these people, but the Europeans are going to have to give us some cash. Anyway, later Goldberg and The Atlantic decided to give up what was said in that chat. This is where we understand why they didn't print the full chat at first, because there were specific details given about certain targets and exact types of planes and bombs and missiles that were being used. They were like emojis of hands praying at some point. Then it came more info about the human targets. One of the targets had just visited his girlfriend, and that it was clear where the bomb should hit, and then later confirmation that the target was indeed hit. Then you see more emojis, a fist and an American flag and a fireball were used. The problem with this is that if we know that the target just entered his girlfriend's building, so then there must be someone feeding that information, right? If information came in that for sure the building was hit, then we conclude that someone there was looking at the building when it was hit. who is that person? Stands to reason that the Houthi also knew that there was someone in the vicinity that knows all this information because of this chat group. So now the Houthi know there is a spy in the area watching and feeding the information that's going on there to the Americans. Now, if I was that spy, I'd be a little worried right now. Also, the reporter did not give out the information of the when he first got it because of the sensitivity of it. But what if he had have done that? What if he had have printed all this? What if he had to put it on the web? I mean, the Houthi have anti-aircraft missiles. They have shot down planes before. Also, we later found out that some of the people on the group were not even in the U.S. at the time. In fact, one of them was in Russia using his own personal phone. We know already that Russia has the ability to hack into phones. They have the ability to intercept messages. So when reporters asked Hegseth about why they included a reporter in this group chat, he called the reporter deceitful and highly discredited. So-called journalists has made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again. Then later something about the reporter connection with the Russia investigation from 7 years ago. Then again saying the reporter said he saw war plans, and there were no war plans. The reporter saw no war plans. But the question being asked, if these are not war plans, then what are war plans? And Hegseth, some multiple times, that there was no classified information in this chat. Here again, if this is not classified material, then what is classified material? Many have suggested if they all would have just said, yes, we should not have participated in this group chat like this, and we won't do it again, then this probably would all be gone away by now. But they didn't. The group from the Trump administration has either continued to lie about this or just doesn't understand how classified information should be handled. Now, the House Intelligence Committee got a chance to question several of the people in the chat group. Now, as you can imagine, the committee spent the entire time just slamming the Trump people on how incompetent they were, on how they put American pilots in danger, how this is the most sensitive and the highly classified data that there could possibly be. Yes, even Trump continued to say that this is not classified and that they did nothing wrong and that there is no sources, methods, locations, or war plans shared. Head of the intelligence, 𝗪cie𝗪𝗪, said that this was just a standard update to the National Security Cabinet. Of course, many on the panel completely disagreed with this. In fact, even though she was on the chat, she refused to answer that she was even really on the chat at all, or even that if she was using her own phone or not. So when the committee asked them about the messages that were printed in the newspaper, all they could say is that they don't recall that in the conversation. The whole hearing was just ridiculous. Later, Trump came on some radio show to say that the attack was successful, but no classified information or details were ever mentioned or compromised. Trump's press secretary called the Atlantic article a complete hoax that was written by a Trump hater. But then a National Security Council spokesman said that the article entitled "The Trump Administration Accidentally Texted Me This," it was authentic and was sent to the reporter by accident. It was even later suggested that maybe the wrong phone number was put under the wrong name because people put wrong phone numbers in their contact list sometimes. Also, the possibility that it was a screw up by some low-level staffer. Maybe the reporter Goldberg somehow wormed his way into the chat group. Whilst the National Security Advisor Trump, who said he started the group, also said, of course, I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now, whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some technical means, that's something we're trying to figure out. But the reporter Goldberg, who is a very well-respected journalist, said, I didn't hack into anyone's phone. Mike Waltz invited me to a signal group, and then he invited me into this particular chat group. I don't know how to say it any more simply than that. Now, Elon Musk who for once is not in the news, has offered to put in his technical experts on this to figure out how this number was inadvertently added to the chat. But it seems pretty clear at this point, doesn't it? They simply just didn't check it. They added the contacts that were in the phone, and they simply didn't check to see who was actually in the group. The only good thing was that the reporter was responsible enough not to publish the information before the strike happened. But there is a real underlying question that the Intelligence Committee and Congress want to know. Is this the only time this has happened? Is this the only time that the Trump people used a commercial app to discuss highly classified information? Also, there is a law that all information such as this must be preserved. And yet the chat had this thing that was set to disappear all the words in 48 hours. If this reporter had not taken screenshots of the conversation, we would have never known about any of this. But maybe this is the reason why they did it. Because they didn't want the conversation preserved, because in reality, they didn't want the president to see it or know about it. Remember when the vice president, J.D. Vance, suggested that the president, Trump, didn't understand what an operation like this would do to the oil prices or how the public would react? Kind of makes sense. I'd like to say I came up with that. However, so many other people did. But J.D. Vance has some other issues this week. On a recent show I've been talking about the fact that Donald Trump wants to take over Greenland. He has insisted that it should belong to the U.S., and the people there also want to be part of the U.S. So J.D. Vance went to Greenland to talk to the people. Of course, Denmark currently oversees Greenland. Anyway, J.D. Vance went to Greenland and asked the people of Greenland to consider joining the U.S. He said Denmark has not been good for Greenland and has left them vulnerable to possible incursions by China and Russia. Actually, I didn't know China and Russia were making moves on Greenland, but Vance asked his people to cut a deal with the U.S., that they should sever ties with Denmark. Of course, the Prime Minister of Denmark said he did not appreciate the tone of Vance, and that maybe Vance come up with a different way of speaking. Vance and his wife were supposed to be there for several days. However, they ended up being there just a few hours, and this was at a space base in the north, some 1,500 kilometers from the capital. It seemed the people of Greenland were not welcoming Vance to come to the capital, to the point where they had some security concerns. He made some remarks at the space base in which he said that Greenland has many untapped minerals and oil reserves which the U.S. could help with, and told the people to cut relations with Denmark and instead fall in line under the U.S. He went after Denmark again, saying, "You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security of this incredible, beautiful landmass." To which Denmark replied, or the leader of Denmark, "For many years we have stood side by side with the Americans in very difficult situations. Therefore, it is not an accurate way for the vice president to refer to Denmark." But back at the White House, Trump also made a statement insisting that the U.S. needs to take over Greenland to ensure peace in the world. He said, "We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't." He went on to say that if Denmark and the European Union can't understand the situation, then we are going to have to explain it to them. But the problem the U.S. is going to have is taking Greenland is that the people of Greenland are all nearly against the idea. In multiple interviews with the people in Greenland, it's hard to find even one person that wants the U.S. to take over their country. So in any case, J.D. Vance got back on his plane and flew back to the U.S. Seems his strategy did not work out all that well. But between the security issues with the Trump chat groups and the taking over of Greenland, it hasn't been the best of weeks for the Trump people. But I'll be following up these stories and giving you the updates as all these stories unfold. And this is Eric Lecain on DZRJ, talking about the biggest news stories going on around the world right here on the Jam. I just want to talk about a story that came out this week in the Ukraine. It's not the usual talks of a ceasefire or the fact that they can't seem to ever work out a ceasefire. It's about babies. And where are they? Right now, Ukraine has the lowest birth rate in the world. There are 3 deaths for every 1 birth in the Ukraine. That means that the population is vastly shrinking. As of now, the adult males between 25 and 35 are slowly disappearing. The war is basically killing off the future of the country. Last year, the birth rates dropped by 40%. Birth around the world will drop sometimes, 2 to 3%, but 40%? That's nearly half. In the maternity ward of the local hospital, there is no one around. It's empty. One nurse said, no one is giving birth today, and no one gave birth yesterday, and no one gave birth the day before. But the funeral parlor is very busy. They have a burial almost every day. In fact, usually funerals are in groups of maybe 2 or 3 per day. And instead of digging a grave when someone dies, they dig 10 holes because they already know they're going to need them. The funerals there are perfectly done. They have the procedure down very well because there are so many. It's almost an odd occurrence that someone would die of old age. If you chart the Ukrainian population, it was somewhere around 44.3 million in 2021. And now approximately 32 million counted in 2024. In other words, they are a shrinking country. Some people are leaving, most likely never returning. And then there's a collapse in fertility. And of course, young men are dying every day. Eastern Europeans as a whole is declining in population. However, it's nothing like what's happening in the Ukraine now. Statistically, you need around 2.1 births per woman to keep a population sustained. If Ukraine has even 1 birth per woman, they're lucky. This is one of those situations in which it may take years or even decades to fix this, and that's why if they need to start fixing it now. But as of now, the chances of a ceasefire between the 2 countries seem even farther away. There is a limited ceasefire in effect right now, but is that a real ceasefire? It is circled around 2 things: safe navigation through the Black Sea and no more knocking out electrical facilities. But even the tentative deal that was made through the U.S., there are so many things neither can agree on. Putin is saying that we agreed to the deal. However, you must lift some sanctions on exports of agricultural equipment to Russia. But Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is like, you can't lift the sanctions. That's what we used to bargain with. Also, who's going to make sure that Russia will in any way stick to its agreements? I mean, as they are trying to hammer out a deal, the Ukraine is getting hammered with drone strikes and missiles every day. Also, when it comes to energy plants being bombed, that agreement read energy and infrastructure. And the Russians said it needs to read energy infrastructure. In other words, they need to be able to bomb everything around the energy plant. Also, if at any time Russia thinks that Ukraine is not keeping up its end of the bargain, then they can bomb anything they want, anytime they want again. But to get to a real and complete ceasefire agreement, Russia is saying that the Ukraine may no longer accept weapons from the outside, which of course the Ukrainians are not going to agree to. Meanwhile, the heavy fighting and killing continues. Russia claims Ukraine's bombed a high-voltage power link linking the nuclear plant to a Russian city. And Ukraine's claim that the Russians launched 139 long-range drones into Ukraine and injuring multiple people, including many children. So I can't say for sure if this ceasefire that the U.S. proposed is very meaningful, but one thing is becoming very apparent. Europe is not waiting around to see what the U.S. is going to do anymore. After the apparent disrespectful day the president of Ukraine got kicked out of the White House, the alliance between the Europeans and the U.S. was now put in front of a very powerful light. the U.S. is no longer stands on the side of its oldest ally, Europe. At some point in the last 3 months, it seems the U.S. has switched sides. President Trump is openly moving back to Putin, which is not really that big of a surprise to anybody. Also, with that signal chat coming to light and the comments of 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀 in regards to how pathetic Europe is and how they are a bunch of freeloaders, it's leading the Europeans to make some changes, starting with Germany. They have decided to remove the debt brake on the government borrowing. This will allow unlimited spending on defense and security. So it wasn't the war that put Germany over the edge. It was Donald Trump. With the recent actions of the president of the U.S., Germany is going to build up its military for the first time in decades. France has decided to change its rules a little bit around, saying it will extend the protection of its nuclear arsenal. This seems to be including the UK as well. Even Poland has stated that it's thinking about the possibility of having nuclear weapons itself. And now, the countries that border Russia, Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, they have all pulled out of the 1997 Ottawa Treaty, which removes landmines from the border. Lithuania has already announced that it will be buying 85,000 landmines and has removed itself from the International Treaty Against Cluster Munitions. This is while Poland says it plans to produce 1 million or so mines domestically and requiring every adult male to go through military training. Also, Denmark is bringing back the draft and women will be eligible in 2026. Even Ireland has introduced legislation to allow troops to deploy without UN approval. This is in case the US and Russia team up together at the UN and try and block Ireland. In any case, European has realized that if there would be some kind of invasion, they can no longer rely on the U.S. to help them. They will need to stand on their own. And this is the World News Jam on Radio Bandito TV, and I'm Eric Lecain. I wanted to touch on sports news a bit this week. You know, in sports, anything can happen. In 1980, the U.S. men's ice hockey team beat the Russian team in the Olympics for the gold medal. The Russians hadn't been beaten in 9 Olympics. In 1990, a man named Buster Douglas was in a boxing match with the world champion Mike Tyson. He had a 41-1 odds against him, and he won the world championship. Jack Fleck, complete unknown in the golf world, beat Ben Hogan in the 1955 U.S. Open Golf Championship. It was the single biggest upset in golf history. But now, what happened this past week was not quite as big as some of those. However, it was pretty big for some of us. In the world of tennis, to make it into the top 1,000, it's an incredible feat. I was watching a talk show one time where they were explaining just how hard it is to get into the top 1,000, but making it into the top 100, well, that's a whole other world of tennis. This week, a 19-year-old Filipino tennis player named Alex Eala got granted a wild card in the Miami Open Tennis Championship. In the past, she had lost in the qualifiers to get into the big tournaments, but this time she would be playing in the main draw. Now, did anyone expect her to win a match in the main draw? Probably not. But something miraculous happened. She won in the round of 128, but then she won in the round of 64. This was an amazing feat in itself. But it put her in the round of 32. And in the round of 32, well, you start to face the best players in the world, the real world champions. But in the round of 32, she beat the number 5 player in the world, also the reigning Australian champion. It was her first win against a top 10 player. Then in the round of 16, she got some luck when the world number 11 had to pull out due to injury. This put her in the quarterfinals, which for a 140th ranked player was a dream come true. Just think, a relatively unknown 140th ranked Filipino player was playing in the quarterfinals of a world WTA competition. She was facing the number 2 player in the world. Now, realistically, It would be a great experience for her, but the chances of beating the Polish woman were very slim at best. But then she won. 6-2, 7-5 in straight sets. Now, all of a sudden, people are saying, who is this? She was the first Filipino player to ever attain such a standing in an event like this, and now the whole tennis world was watching her. Now, in the semifinals, she was up against the number 4 in the world, an American, and it looked a few times like she was going to beat the number 4. I mean, she was ahead in the first set and then won the second set. It was absolutely a spectacular match, but in the end, she lost 7-6, 5-7, 6-3. This was only the third time in tournament history that a wild card had ever made it to a semifinal. This will move her in the rankings to number 75 in the world, making her the highest ranked Filipino ever in the WTA. But more importantly, she will not have to play in any of these qualifiers anymore. She had not been making it through the qualifiers in the past few big events, so this is big. And now she will automatically be set in the main draw. She will also now officially be the highest ranked Southeastern Asian tennis player in the world. Now, coming up, she'll be playing in the Madrid Open in about 4 weeks, and expectations are high going into that event. But remember, she's just 19 years old. So there's a lot of time to move even higher in the rankings. But for now, I believe she realizes that she's supposed to be there, to be playing in the top 16 of a tournament. So let's just see if she continues this incredible win streak. Maybe one day, the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam. And this is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam. Thank you so much for joining us here on our discussion of the world's biggest news stories. Please join us again next week on the Jam here on DZRJ and Radio Bandito TV. So for now, everyone be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.